You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Cynthia Toolin-Wilson on my show, Author to Author.
Over the years, I've really come to love the dialogue and seen the way it plays an important role in just student formation, in kind of getting them engaged in some of the major questions at stake in philosophy and in our program, because I'm at a college called New College Franklin. It's a little Christian liberal arts college where we are doing a classical education program, but it's through the quadrivium and trivium. And so we're really thinking through science, we're thinking through the classical liberal arts, and engaging in kind of also a great books mode of reading. So epistemology matters. It wasn't the central conversation back in the classical period, but it's become much more important because people are so askew in how they think of epistemology and knowledge. So it's a great beginning for freshmen. And I began studying at Holy Apostles, and that's where I met you. But I ran into all these really masterful instructors there, and studied Thomistic philosophy, studied Aristotelian philosophy a little more closely, and reading that alongside, particularly De Anima, but some of the logical works of Aristotle also, it just really stood out to me that what we have in the Theaetetus is a early representation of the three acts of the mind. And what that means is that if I back up a little bit, the dialogue, as a lot of Plato's dialogues, asks a central question, and the central question is, what is knowledge? And it follows a lot of different rabbit trails, a lot of different directions, but primarily you can divide the dialogue up into three sections, and those three sections are sense apprehension, true opinion or opinion, and true opinion with a logos, or true opinion with an account. And those really match up with what are talked about in logic as the three acts of the mind, the three things which our mind does in order to understand the world. And so that those three which parallel it are understanding, judgment, and reason, or syllogism. And so, as you know, it's been said years ago, I think it might have been Russell or Whitehead who said everything is footnotes on Plato. Once again, this proves to be the case, that Plato has kind of laid out for us an exploration of the basic ways knowledge has been divided. And that's really helpful, because that means we don't have to talk about knowledge univocally. We can talk about all the different ways we know things. Sense apprehension can even in some sense be described as knowledge. Understanding and apprehension is a form of knowledge. Judgment is a form of knowledge. And so is syllogism. And so there's different kinds of knowledge, and then there's different modes of knowers. There's the kind of knowing we talk about that a child knows their parent, and that's a really fundamental mode of knowing. And there's the kind of knowing of Galileo knowing the way objects fall, which is in no way sense apprehensible. He had to abstract to a high degree in order to get to a generalized understanding of the rate of falling objects, and doing that through rolling objects and all sorts of other methods that are really just so complicated. And yet that's scientific knowing. So there's these different ways that we know things. And what that does is it situates us in the world humanly. So that's kind of the work of the class, is reading Plato and working through how knowledge is both fundamental to us, something we all have in some degree, and something we all lack in some degree. And so those were some of the early impetuses of the book in general.
It sounds like the students are really getting a good education when they start with something like that. When you think of the time we live in now, the majority of people would argue that the only way of knowing anything is scientific.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and you have to have proof, and, that's, it just is a very different way of looking at the world.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's kind of two different directions we pull in, and we kind of pull in them both at once in contradictory ways. One is we demand proof for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then we deny proof is really possible in some way. We're deeply skeptical of the world.
Yes.
We're deeply distrustful of any of our natural powers, our faculties of knowing the world, even though our fundamental experience is really being situated in a world that we grasp, even if imperfectly. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we recognize the power of science. We recognize how successful it is. And so we use that as the only model for knowing. And we chiefly fall back, of course, on mathematical science.
Yeah.
In the great tradition, there's all kinds of science and there's all kinds of ways of knowing. But part of that means understanding that not everything can be proved. And in fact, if you demand proof for everything, what you ultimately are saying is you can know nothing. Mm-hmm. You have to have a beginning. And that's something that I think the classical logic, Thomas, Aristotle, Plato have all been really strong on, is that what Dr. Redpath, one of the instructors at Holy Apostle, calls the real situation, or in fancy phenomenological terms, the life world. This real existence is the actual beginning place. It's not the deep abstractions. It's not the Cartesian separation from our experience. It's actually just this fundamental contact with reality. One of the beautiful teachings of Aristotle and Thomas is that we only know ourselves after we've interacted with the world. We know ourselves through the world. It's by knowing others and other things that we really come to know things. And that situates us as relational, communal beings who are engaged intentionally and in connection with things. So that the Cartesian method that really is paralyzing, it's a cause of anxiety and confusion, really mischaracterizes the fact that we are already in relationship with the world, with one another, with God, and that frees us from the anxiety of having to dig an impossible hole out of the mind into the world. Rather, the mind, Kenneth Gallagher was really great on this, is a mind precisely by being in touch with something other than itself. And so that we are relational creatures through and through. And we long for those relationships, but we already have them. And that's partly why young children, when they're not related to, when they're not touched, when they're not cared for, when they're not attended to, don't develop the way they should. We're not just Cartesian minds in a box. We're these embodied souls.
Yeah, that's very interesting when you think of the way, again, that we live today. It's always interested me too. Of course, my initial training was as a sociologist, and we're the statistics people, So we really buy into the kind of science, that kind of science. But it struck me at some point how odd it was that so many of the people that are really interested in that approach to the world can never find any truth they believe in. So it's almost as if it's self-defeating if that's the only thing people are looking for.
It is. Yeah. I was just talking with some students today, and I think there's this anxiety that a lot of young people go through. Just, is the world even real?
Yeah.
Which seems so absurd. But I even know when I would doubt that, and when I became a Christian, that was really one of the things that was impressed on me, was the reality of the world. But I think what happens is we're stuck in thinking of rationality as pure reason, as pure logic. And what rationality is it's a spiritual mode of relationship to things. And so what we're ultimately after is not a proof the world exists. We're after the conviction that the world is ordered under love, that God is love and that he loves us, so that what will make us cease to doubt the existence of other things, the meaning of things, is not going to be a proof. It's going to be looking in the face of love. That's when we know things are real. That's the ground of our being. It's certainly truth, but that truth is love. And so it's before the face of God that we are set free from the need to prove everything, not only just by faith right now, but because he's the ground of being and truth. And that being that we're made in his image is love.
Yeah. Good points.
For that. But they're not the goal.
Yeah. That's true.
And that's really one of the things that Plato is so amazing at. I love Aristotle. I love the way he works, the way he reasons, but there's something in the Platonic dialogues that are, of course, they're a little bit more fun to read, but also his trajectory, the way he points to God is just amazing. It's a dialogue on knowledge. And the first real question he asks is knowledge the same thing as wisdom? And he's talking to this young guy, which is great for reading with students because they really relate to this young guy getting asked questions by Socrates and being just very humble and trying to do the hard work of thinking these things through. But he asks him, is knowledge the same thing as wisdom? And he kind of just blows past it and says, sure. Right? But as we get older, we're really clear we can have a lot of knowledge and not a lot of wisdom. And so the first major definition of knowledge he offers is sense perception. And as they're working through that, Plato recognizes, or Socrates recognizes, that that's virtually equivalent to saying man is the measure of everything. It is Protagoras' argument. Man is the measure of everything. And eventually he brings Protagoras on stage and gives Protagoras' argument for what wisdom is. And it turns out that wisdom for Protagoras has nothing to do with truth. It separates truth and goodness, truth and beauty into two different categories. And you can immediately feel kind of the moral danger of this. But at nearly the center of the dialogue, he offers his definition of true wisdom, which is really shocking and just glorious. He says, true wisdom is knowing there's a fate we can't escape. And that fate is that we will either have conformed the pattern of our life and soul to God in righteousness, and we will bear that forever in happiness, or we will have conformed our soul to the pattern of misery and evil and bear that pattern on our soul for eternity. So it's an amazingly stark and glorious picture of what we're called to do and what true wisdom is. That true wisdom takes you to the highest things, the highest causes, the thing we should be most concerned with. All other knowledge comes under that for him.
Yeah. The students must really enjoy learning that.
Yeah, they love it. They're compelled by it. And it also helps break up, because a lot of the dialogue's tough. A lot of it is kind of going in and out of various difficult problems of sense perception, which if all you've got is sense perception and you've got no memory, you've got no judgment, you've got no reason, you've really just got flux and change. So they're exploring, what is it even like, to think of a world that's just flux and change. And so he works through that section of the dialogue, which is parallel to understanding where we form concepts and experience objects as such and substances and kind of know the world, even if we're not forming scientific judgments about it. He then transitions to a discussion of true opinion, and he starts bringing in the faculties of the soul that are the interior faculties of reason, of imagination, memory, and at that point, he's asking this tougher question where he's saying, okay, if it's true opinion, what's false opinion? And how do we do that? And that's really hard to explain, how we do false opinion. But the remarkable thing that comes out of that discussion is there's actually something primary, which is knowledge. Because you can't have a false opinion unless there's something to opine about.
Mm-hmm.
Wittgenstein talks about that doubt is a secondary phenomena. And you could say that the same thing about false opinion, that it's got to be secondary to some actual engagement with reality, whatever that is. And only then can you form a false judgment. But he brings in all these fascinating images. That's one of the delights of Plato. Imagery he brings in. This dialogue has the imagery or account of the midwife, in which the educator acts not as someone who kind of pours knowledge into the brain of their pupil, but simply kind of facilitates the bringing forth of knowledge. Plus, he's recognizing that we all have this potency, this power, this capability to learn, to know. In this dialogue, he talks about wonder and the connection of wonder and philosophy. We have that obviously echoed in Aristotle's Metaphysics in the first book, I believe. I think it's the first book of the Metaphysics, where he talks about that really philosophy and the people who wrote myths were concerned with the same thing, which was wonders. That myths were the early philosophy. But he talks about how myth deals with wonder, and that wonder is the beginning of all philosophy. It places us in contact with the things we know, but don't know like we'd like to know. Like when we look at a rainbow and we want to know, how did that get there? And that's precisely the analogy he uses, because he talks about Iris, who is the messenger goddess of the rainbow, but her father is Thaumas, and his name means wonder. So he talks about her genealogy not being badly made, because in this natural phenomena, in this rainbow, right, it evokes wonder and it moves us to the source of things. So that nature starts moving it to the causes, which means nature's really moving us to the highest cause, to God, because it's evoking wonder. Why is this here?
Yeah.
Acting. I know it, but I don't know it like I'd like to.
Yeah. Yeah, that I think is so true. It's hard, not just to look at the natural world and feel wonder, but just to look at, to me, when I look at skylines of a city and realize, how man has been able to make things like this and has learned how to do these things over time, it gives you a sense of wonder, exactly at, to me, obviously, the intellect that God has given us and how we've learned to use it. So
that was one of the things that the program really accomplished, was clarifying the idea of intentionality. Kind of contrary to Cartesian representationalism, where what we're really concerned with for Descartes are our own ideas. Whereas in the Thomistic model and in Aristotle's model, it was an intentional model, which meant that science and knowledge was not just about knowing the truth or knowing facts. It wasn't when just the mind reflected reality or when it was conformed to reality, but it was when it knew it was conformed to reality. And so it's not just about knowing stuff, but it's about being related to the world. So it's knowing things in truth, being related to things in truth. And that's what our mind, our intellect really does, is it's a relational spiritual organ in which we can be related to reality and truth, not just according to our senses or appetites, but according to what things are, according to good and evil, according to natural law, according to divine law. And so that it places us in this really amazing relation. And that's why we love science. That's what's so compelling about wonder, is not just we want facts. It's, I want to know that thing. I want to know this world. And ultimately, if we followed it, it would be, I want to know the source of all things. Why things at all.
I've experienced that in my own life, where it's like I do, as I said, I enjoy looking at things that man has created, but it's like, where did we ever get that ability?
That's right.
And that really is the thing that makes you have to stop and think. But of course, the opposite side of that is, where do we get the ability to be so destructive? That's
right.
just heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
But it's and that of course goes back to just the relationship we have with others, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are a complex being. We know things and we're ignorant. We love and we don't love what we ought to love.
Yeah.
When we know what we ought to love.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of wisdom to know what to do with and how to live with that. And that's why we have guidance and counselors. And that's one reason I also love Plato and the Theaetetus is some of the incompleteness of the work, respecting just that we are philosophers, we're not sophers, we're not Sophia, we're not wise. The way Joseph Pieper put it is we have a borrowed wisdom if we have it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful way to put it. We borrow it because we're not the source of that.
Mm-hmm.
We have it by a kind of love. And so we are united to the ones we love. And so when we're united to when we love wisdom and we love one who's wise, that's our real way of possessing wisdom. It's the same way that a child imitates a parent. They love them, and so they try to do the things that they do. They try to, pretend to bake when they're little, or to do carpentry, or to to work out or run or whatever it is their parents do. And their love unifies them in a kind of imitation. And that's what Plato's actually doing, or Socrates is doing with his pupil or interlocutor, Theaetetus. Theaetetus is actually a fascinating character because he's a historical character, and he will produce some major steps forward in the theory of irrational magnitudes or numbers, which appear in Euclid's Elements. And so he also dies in battle, and he seems to be a truly kind of virtuous pagan fellow who Socrates takes up in this conversation, and they just have this really deep, rich engagement where he follows him. He kind of shows what the virtues of a student are. He's curious, he's docile, he's hardworking, he doesn't want to give up, but he also recognizes when he's lost. And so it's just fun to kind of follow their progress together. There's a few other lovely moments in the dialogue. So like I said, there's the midwife imagery, which is pretty famous. People use the term eugenics to talk about that. There is the philosophy begins in wonder. It has no other source. There's also the image of the signet ring and the wax, where he talks about the memory being a kind of wax blob or tablet in the heart, and you put impresses on it. And that image, I'm sure he didn't come up with that all by himself. That's probably somewhat common, but that gets followed in Aristotle, gets followed throughout kind of history. We have that even later on in Locke with the tabula rasa, the blank slate. He also develops this idea of hexis, which hexis is kind of a active state of the soul. It's a habit or way of holding something. And he talks about how you can have something in different ways. I can have a jacket, but not holding it. So I can own a jacket, but not have it with me at that time. And so he distinguishes between the owning or having and the holding. And that gets taken up by Aristotle in two different ways. One is in first act and second act, such as the soul can have potencies, but not be using them. It can have hexis, but also in terms of the habits of moral virtue, that we can develop those hexis, those character habits. And so that also comes out of this. And really amazing is that in the last section where the definition is that knowledge is true opinion plus a logos plus rational account. He ends up saying they're trying to think through, well, what would count as a rational account? And they start working through the elements of things, the stoicheia, which that's where we go. Stoichiometry is from where is a name we use for chemistry sometimes. The elements. And he's playing with the alphabets and relating the alphabet letters to the elements of chemistry. But then he also suggests that perhaps we only can define a thing, we have a logos, when we give a difference. And that for someone familiar with a logic textbook, that's obviously the specific difference he's saying, the difference which sets it apart from everything else.
Mm-hmm.
He's giving us a definition of a thing according to its specific difference. So we have some of the real fundamentals of basic classical logic all laid out for us in this dialogue, which is really just a delight to kind of read through and see, because students at our school at New College Franklin are going through logic at the same time that they're reading this. And so there's lots of fun parallels and insights that they get to. You know,
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, we go through Dr. Kreef's book on logic. Both a beast in a sense. It's a tough book. It's sometimes a fire hose, but it really says what needs to be said, and so it's an excellent text. I love it.
Very good. So the school that you're teaching at, what year is this that the students are starting this? The very beginning, or?
Yeah, so this is the, I think, 13th year of the college, but we have a 4-year college, and they begin with Theaetetus freshman year. What we do is we parallel up the quadrivium, so they do arithmetic their first year, geometry, music, cosmology, astronomy, their senior year. So they're doing logic and they're doing arithmetic that first year. And we put this in arithmetic because arithmetic is not just math and counting for us, but it's kind of an introduction to science. It's an introduction to division, to the way the mind works, to the rational process, also to the modes of reasoning and various modes of apprehension, and then how we apply that to various things that will come up as they go through our program.
Sounds like a really good program.
It's a lot of fun.
A lot of thought.
It does. It's a demanding program, but our students are generally very good readers. They're hard readers. And most importantly, they usually come in just ready to learn and interested in learning. And I've really been loved well by them, and they're a delight. They're a great bunch of kids. They're eager, they're hungry for a sense that the world really is as they experience it rather than as they think it is. So they relearn the world in some way. They're able to bring their faith and the truths of their faith in conversation with reason in a much richer way. To kind of fly on both wings.
That's excellent. So, and really for something that's only 13 years old, that's a lot of progress and a lot of thought going into that program.
Well, it's a college, so they're 18. But
I mean the structure of it, the structure of the institution. That's really good. Yes,
thank you. Well, we've had a lot of good help, a lot of good people. Greg, our dean of the college, was really just a visionary in terms of thinking through and looking at the various models, the Oxford model, St. John's in Annapolis, and kind of taking from a lot of different places and seeing how could we do something here at a small level. And just really blessed to be invited on. I've met a lot of really great people and faculty here.
Yeah, well, you might think of it as being a small place, but you never know the impact you have. You can have through one person, or how they go out into the world and can actually have tremendous impact. So it's really something when you think of it. Young minds, they're like sponges. I know that's well used, but it's true. They really soak things up. And if they're in a place where they're learning the best, that has to have a good impact in the long run.
You have to be careful what you say, because I hear students quote back things to me that I don't quite remember saying, but I must have said it. And so I hear a lot of silly things I've said too over the years. Yeah,
that's good. So that is, it sounds like it's a very very good book and very good institution. It's, it sounds like you're right where you should be.
Yeah. It's been a sweet time of life.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Gosh, I'm really amazed how the dialogue stands up even today to reflect what it takes to learn. The fact of learning in a community, it opens up in a gymnasium.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way in which it reflects our need to help each other as we try to understand these things and to walk together.
Yeah.
And the various impediments, the various places where we're unwilling to move forward, look at the truth, the impediments of fear, of ego, of either laziness, or even some of those facultative impediments like bad memory, or quickness of mind, slowness of mind, that we need so many virtues, and so we need so much grace, and none of us have all of that. So it's always good to read this in community and always see more in it. So I'm really grateful to the professors at Holy Apostles, at St. John's, at Geneseo. It's a state college in New York where I got good instruction, was walked with by really, really great thinkers and readers, and it's just a blessing to be able to read with other people. That's one of the strange providences God has, I guess, ordained, is that He's made us readers, and He's also allowed us to read together, to share a book together, which is a treat.
Yeah. When you think of it, He's the communal God, 3 in 1. So we reflect that, and maybe in some way we reflect that when we're reading. It's like how we interact, how we learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not just from those who are right there before us, but from those way back when.
Yes.
Plato, Socrates, that all these people continue to be our teachers. And
they are. A few years ago, I had always wanted to go for an MFA in writing. I wanted to write my memoir because, not to get off on the personal, but my mother had tried to abort me. And so that had quite an effect on my life, and I always wanted to write about that so that, so that maybe even just one woman read it and said, well, I won't have an abortion or, whatever. But when I was applying to the program, I kept emphasizing that to me, it isn't just that you read a book, someone is talking to you. Sometimes they're talking to you from 1,000 years ago, or they can be talking to you from last year. There is this conversation that goes on constantly with people from the past that are really the same as us in many, many ways. So it's that thought is something that I think is so significant, and people don't necessarily realize.
Yeah, I think that's what Hebrews 11 is doing, where it's recounting. It's that hall of faith, and I think it says Abel still speaks to us, something like that.
Yeah.
That their acts, their deeds, their lives still speak to us. They still inspire us, and so we're surrounded by them as witnesses, and so they bear us up. That we need them, and we don't even realize that's part of the reality, is that our lives begin and we're being nurtured and cared for by people and don't even realize we're being supported. And so really in looking back that we see that. I think that's why Aristotle talks about that. It's the child owes so much to their parent because they never even realize how much they've gotten from them. The parent doing all life long. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So it's an interesting point when you think of it, how this is, this conversation goes on for generation after generation, so. And certainly when you're going all the way back to the ancients, you really are, you're looking at something that's been read and interpreted for hundreds of years. It's fascinating.
It is. It's daunting to even think, am I going to write on Plato? I did a lot of research just trying to find other people who said the same thing about Theaetetus. And so I'm a little bit shocked that that's not been really developed before. I'm sure people have seen parts of it. But no one's kind of just lined it up like that. But, yeah, I mean, even Plato, though, was in conversation.
Yeah.
Right? At the Lyceum, at these schools. And they're in conversation with prior interlocutors, not just Protagoras, not just Heraclitus, Pythagoras, right? That this tradition goes back and back and back before we can actually even trace it. I think it was maybe in Pieper's Four Cardinal Virtues, he says that the four cardinal virtues were on the scene before we even know where they came from. Like they were just there. That people already knew about temperance and courage and justice. That these are prudence, that they were already on the scene. And that's kind of like language itself. That language is almost just there. Like we do not have someone who invented language. That was already like the reality of human existence, was to be immersed in a logocentric, word-based reality. There's so much that's given to us in that sense. The given is the language Pieper uses for it. And that's why we can celebrate. That's why we can worship, is because so much has been given.
True. Well, this has been an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate get to know you better and getting some time to talk about the book and just chat about things in general. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Okay. So would you like to close us in prayer?
Yeah. Father, thank you so much for time together here, for guiding us. I pray that you would be with us as we go forward. Lord, have mercy. I pray this through Christ. Amen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the interview. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure that our listeners will too.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.